Thursday enti editorial me de baneno na se me call trans mo se akom ne family o se nanom penifo ne be yichemi o endra me experience ne ehu pa share the UEFA Champions League no na be yichemi se black continent ne so be he de course on the African continent na ehu pa Boa clubs na o continent no e bono nye boketwa ana bibi kache me say ohene anka 15 years ago anka the same feeling ke benya Ghana ha if say bi obenya 2 Ghanaian clubs bi wom and 1 Ghanaian club bi wom na feeling no ajibe bia ba nay entisa eti ama me dwendwene ama I'm thinking very deeply about our football and the crime between faso ama football no asan arise biom na me bisa me say de na eye me de na kuso metrim no is somebody at the FA thinking the same? Is someone whose responsibility is to develop sports, is to manage the football, is to because I say business as usual. I say problems no ye nisuo no esuru duntino we've thrown our hands in despair. I say we've given up. But we can't give up. No, we can't give up. We need to refocus. We need to rethink. We need to put measures in place, policies in place. I bet you're competing at the highest level on the continent. Because as a football, no, oh, football, they say Obi a Bobby. And because football cry, I'm not being even fair to the fact. Football, they Obi a Bobby. But as the elite level no, on the continent, no, His Royal Highness, Togba Fede, CAF meeting na Okoye e Ethiopia. Ma, just a job show more, we are so be develop it, mano. I never develop it to the highest level, no. Must be bomb say Janabesa show more when your person has football compete at the highest level on the continent. Some meeting of big clubs on the continent are Okoba one Dr. Chekoba ya would the force come we are so develop people to the highest level and they what develop people to the highest level, what develop a commercial center. What's the new headquarters across Fukuno? I pray that same commitment, that same fire, that same passion, everyone building has for team, no playing ball, no, and more compete to the highest level on the continent. Because we share the Kaiser Chiefs, more year, Orlando Pirates, more year, Sundowns, more year. When say, ironically, no, about 20 years ago, South African clubs were not competing on the continent. 10 years. Ironically, But 10 years ago, 20 years ago, South African clubs were not competing at the highest level on the continent. And then football on the continent, I am North Africa and South African clubs. West Africa, just say, do so boy, say the about our corner. And so, Ghanaian clubs, they compete at the highest level. Closely behind us, Ivorian clubs. Nigerian clubs, action bear 2-3 years be or match that, but they've always not competed. In the crowd, they want to fan cast them. By now, we are nowhere to be found. Oh, and last year dreams be any media maybe and you're bad, but only I would like to borrow a year Prince word gravitas, no. When we hear the corner, and to me revive you see that excitement, argument, the competition and the league, no, they don't have the gravitas. Anything important, say we must put pressure on both Kotoko and Haas to put their house in order to be able to compete on the continent. Because as we speak, elite clubs are much treble on the continent. The house for Kahumbi to win the league, your domestic league, win the Champions League, win the Super Cup, win your domestic double, FA Cup and the league, and win the Champions League. Hasselhoek is one of the few clubs in the world that on mathematic treble in the season. Who got the history of African club competition? Kotoko finance or Mabo, and you know, you can never discount them in the discussions I will have on the continent. Players of African Player of the Year, you can't discount them in that discussions. And so they are nowhere to be found. In fact, we hear the Tanzanian clubs here, Yanga and Simba crying now. Your two clubs, they are not close. And there's a club APR for Rwanda, if any APR said, yeah. Rwanda, APR, we are two best players. Has no problems, a pure matter of quality. And it's car to compete. It is as simple as that. And to him say, he has to go to car. I'm going to find best player because some decided say they are bringing our players, our best players on board on the continent back home. They can form a formidable team that can compete on the continent. The can win Ethiopia. The Richmond Temu. Look, it's just pure management issues and Sika. And the FA cannot sit unconcerned. Black Stars in the a shining example. But with the value chain of domestic footballer, Black Stars, Afia Black Stars much saying. First quarter call, but every weekend there's a league game. And you can imagine, say, Kotoko to me filling 40,000 a year every 2 weeks. Oh, Bayara has to me filling 40,000 every 2 weeks for Accra Sports Stadium. You can imagine the stimulation of the economy in Accra and in Kumasi. And the FA cannot sit unconcerned. Indeed, clubs here in North Africa, you see Egyptian football there, Tio, a club in the but we are seeing that Egyptian football also, of course, Sundowns, the owner, or the president of CAF, a basic 4 continental Okahubi. Now will be a copy, baby. Almost ESCO meeting. Also 50 million, with a tour for club competition. $50 million. Sikadi OB. But they can't see South African football. I was so. Every corner, you need the problems administrative that South African football facing. omo regulations come on tias here. CAF regulations the ball qualifiers come on tias here. But two teams now competition now omo bonimu no e de enuonyam share bre wo league no ni omo FA ni omo football. So an FA, you can't turn a blind eye on your domestic football and how competitive or non-competitive your teams are. To me, any individual clubs, of course, they are registered companies guarantee their success are directly linked to the success of our football and the image of our football. And we can't pretend that and fire who. No. Now, when the ability to compete on the continent and far on also or be promotion demotion there for and to be tonight the obey Biama Basake, Holy Stars about Premier League. They are adding no value to the Ghana Premier League. They've added no value. In terms of quality of football, spectatorship, they've added nothing. And nobody can convince me that the FA has no responsibility. They have. Because they've shown us that baby on interest one, only to me ya money ye. And so the entire football, let me borrow the words of Ket Iyesukweku, ecosystem must rise up. Somebody at the FA level, ESCO level must decide, say, look, enough is enough. How can we re-engineer this football ecosystem to compete at the highest level? If it requires meeting government to say government, elsewhere, I buy a clubs in Africa. A flight ticket. Because NJBA Kotoko have benefited, Hasfuk have benefited. I buy them 1 million Ghana cedis some fan call. How can we make this a policy? Say, oh, I'm flights arrangement the Abana Fahunka. Then we will make sure that team economy is well resourced and solid enough to compete. And how can we get into the group stage? How can we get to the semi-final? How can we play in the finals? How can we win it? And you know what I said? Now, Nancy, 2004, not two Ghanaian clubs about the finals of the Confederations Cup. And you know what? Over 21 years in here, now even competing and playing even at the group stage is a problem. Winning the domestic league quite a problem at two clubs here. And if it has actually and a vision create me Vision FC Sunday match Vision in warm Vision FC in house. So there's a lot we can do. No credit ball now teams the ball on the continent and now grow a more day. The level is high. But my point is that it is not beyond the Ghanaian clubs. It is not beyond Ghanaian clubs. What does it take? And fortunately for us, these two giants have history, pedigree in the Champions League and the Confederations Cup. Obo has folk dia any club on the continent, any has folk. Obo Kotoko dia any club on the continent, any moment. Do they have the history and the pedigree? What is left is the organization to go with. They can deny the organization to go with. Brown in the last 10 years, said Omi is serious enough to compete at the highest level. You told 20 players, near Pam 20 players, coach Ban, near Pam coach. He said the way they run their clubs, and your papa. But we can tell them, say, look, jamo. It is not enough to be competing with Inter-Allies, to be competing with a year Vision, Baseke Holy Stars, and enough. And you will level near. And also catching a woman, and you will level near. Your level is up there. Not only I come back the World Club Championship I so this summer in the US. Look at monies involved. Can you imagine that? It's also buying so also never will say who here buying. Because can you imagine those monies coming to the Ghanaian economy? And what it mean to the Ghanaian economy? And look, we can the minister and the government cannot sit idle and say and fire home. We must have that conversation at that high level. The Minister Kofi Adams must be asking, what can I do to help our clubs get to the highest level? When you say the new government have made pledges to football for say Obetua players, we are here to see that being rolled out. But the point is that will that help them compete at the highest level? Maybe yes, maybe no. But the point is that government must be interested. Come and show South African football, yeah. And Chile is so sad. But we can get there. We can get there. Because here in Kodia, love for football, no, the talent is here. The quality is here. The quality to also attract other quality from elsewhere is there. But we are not doing what is right. We are not doing what is proper. As I didn't hear no yedi diagro. As the goodwill no dia in the past nyano yankase yem ye name aboni erodi all the gains ayaye. The TV right issue say ye koso Ghana ha. Enye papa. Enye papa. The bigger responsibility is on the clubs. But of course, FNU as the governing body will also take some of the burden. Charlie, the way football economy, we must be worried. And there was some impact also on the national team. Because for some of these clubs and as a kind of some clubs say, yeah, they know, a players yay and a bomb national team. A players yay. So if they are competing at the highest level, week in, week out, they are growing confidence. They are learning on the job. They become better. And Tewusha, Sudan or no body Tariba Krumha, you are surprised. Don't be surprised. Ali Hilal, you can say, we were born on the continent. And check Ali Ashaw 1-0, 8th of April. Ali Ashaw 1-0. So Al Hilal players competing even though to question Kroma what they are still competing. They are still competing. Etomunya organization papa nya head coach papa na say enei wo back transport stadium no obeshawa enye nwa the problem who say has problem Kotoko problem but be national problem who say I've shown you say has problem Kotoko problem but our dire consequences on our national team and I've exhibited it. I've given you proof. Send the jet any foreign place will be but I'll show a transport stadium home all the bogus beba or the locals beba but I'll show our transport stadium has problem Kotoko problem on that fateful day on the transport stadium a national problem. And we've lived in this delusion, say, we are a football nation, born in Nimbo. And the president of the Republic say, on the team, this is because it's that delusion, that superiority complex, that it is not true. It is not true. One you name ya, Sudan mabe show Ghana, Niger mabe show Angola mabe show Ghana. So all the stakeholders, government, FA, clubs, must come together and find solutions. If you have to go back to the 1990s and 80s where government took a key role, keen interest in clubs playing on the continent, we have to go back to it. Because it is not getting funny anymore. It is not. And my complaint this morning, my lamentation this morning is that somebody must decide, say, enough is enough. Enough is enough.